Captain Marin Visser stood at the bridge window of the UES Pale Morning and watched the stars drift by like cold white seeds scattered across black soil. She had been a captain for 11 years, and in all that time she had never once grown tired of the view. The stars did not care about politics or power or the petty cruelties of empires. They simply burned, and that was enough. The Pale Morning was not a remarkable ship by any standard that mattered to the galaxy. It was a mid-sized human cruiser with a dull gray hull and commercial-grade engines that hummed at a frequency most alien species found irritating. It carried 300 crew members and a cargo hold full of medical supplies bound for the border colony of Verath 4. To any passing scanner, it looked exactly like what it was supposed to look like. A slow and unremarkable merchant vessel, crewed by a slow and unremarkable species. Humanity had been traveling the stars for over 4 centuries now, and in all that time, the galaxy had reached a single unified opinion about them. They were young. They were fragile. They lived such short lives that by the time one of them learned something useful, they were already dying. The Concord of 12, the coalition of elder species that ruled the galaxy the way a landlord rules a building, tolerated humans the way one tolerates a small dog in a restaurant, not worth the effort of removing, but certainly not welcome at the table. Marin had grown up with that reality. She had felt it in the way alien diplomats looked past her at summit meetings. She had tasted it in the trade agreements that gave humanity the worst hyperspace corridors and the thinnest resource margins. She had heard it in the word the Velhari used for humans, Kethra, which translated roughly to those who will pass. She did not argue with any of it. She did not complain. She simply noted it and kept moving forward the way all humans did. The bridge was quiet that morning. Officer Tomas Reyes sat at the tactical console reviewing supply manifests with the kind of focused boredom that came from doing the same job 1,000 times. Navigation Officer Priya Sandhu plotted their course through the approved containment lane, one of the narrow corridors the Concord had recently imposed on all human vessels. The official reason was a biological quarantine after some fabricated disease scare on a colony world. The real reason was control. Everyone knew that. Nobody said it. Marin was about to head to her quarters for a cup of coffee when the communications panel chimed with a sound she had heard only twice before in her career, the sharp double tone of an Admiralty priority cipher. The kind of message that came wrapped in so many layers of encryption that it would burn itself from the system 10 seconds after being read. She crossed to the panel and pressed her palm to the reader. The message decoded itself and scrolled across her personal screen in tight green text. She read it once. Then she read it again. Then she stood very still for a long time. The message was from Admiral Chen Wei at Earth Strategic Command, and it contained 2 pieces of information. The first was a code name, the Ash Decree. The second was an explanation of what that code name meant. The Concord of 12 had voted in secret session to authorize the systematic destruction of every human colony in the galaxy. The campaign would be disguised as a decontamination protocol, orbital bombardment dressed up in the language of public health. Each colony would be surrounded and sterilized one by one, starting with the outermost settlements and working inward toward Earth. The timeline was already in motion. The first strikes were expected within weeks. Marin read the message a 3rd time because her hands had started shaking, and she needed them to stop. 40,000 people lived on Verath 4, families and children and old people who had come to the edge of known space because they wanted a quiet life. They had no warships in orbit. They had no planetary shields. They had a medical clinic and a school and a small park where children played under an artificial sun. The Admiralty's orders were clear. Do not engage, do not reveal, do not break cover, gather intelligence and return to Earth. The Pale Morning was too valuable to risk in a fight it could not win. Marin deleted the message and watched the green text dissolve from the screen. She turned back to the bridge window and looked at the stars again. They still did not care. They still simply burned. She thought about her ship, this dull gray box that every alien species in the galaxy looked at and dismissed. She thought about what was underneath the hull, the things that no scanner had ever detected because no one had ever thought to look closely at a human ship. Why would they? It was just a merchant vessel, crewed by a species that would pass. Her from the window. A woman in her late 40s with short dark hair and the kind of face that people trusted without quite knowing why. She had been chosen for this command, not because she was the best fighter or the boldest leader. She had been chosen because she was patient, and patience was a quality that humanity had learned to value above all others. Patience was what you developed when the entire galaxy looked down on you. Patience was what you cultivated when every door was closed and every hand was raised against you. Patience was the thing that let you smile at your enemies and nod politely and go home and build something terrible in the dark. The hours passed slowly after that. Marin went about her duties and said nothing to her crew. She checked cargo manifests and signed duty rosters and ate lunch in the mess hall with her officers. She laughed at a joke Tomas told about a Velhari diplomat and a broken translator. She was the picture of calm routine. Just a clock was ticking. It was Priya who broke the silence. She looked up from her navigation console with an expression that Marin had never seen on her face before. Not fear exactly, but something close to it. Something that lived in the neighborhood of fear and borrowed its furniture. "Captain," she said quietly, "I am picking up a formation on long-range sensors. 12 capital ships, Concord military configuration. They are on a direct heading for Verath 4. The bridge went silent. Every officer turned to look at Marin. 12 capital ships for one undefended colony. That was not a quarantine force. That was an execution squad. Marin looked at the sensor data and felt something settle inside her like a stone dropping into deep water. The shaking in her hands was gone, now replaced by a stillness that went all the way to her bones. She had known this moment would come. She had trained for it. She had dreaded it. She had prayed it would never arrive. She looked at her ship. Her quiet and unremarkable ship that the galaxy had never once considered worth a second glance. "Understood," she said, and her voice did not waver. "Maintain course and speed. Change nothing." She returned to the bridge window and placed one hand flat against the cold glass. Beneath her palm, somewhere deep inside the walls of the pale morning, something hummed at a frequency that no alien species had ever heard before. The stars burned on, and Marin Visser waited the way humans had always waited, quietly, and with something dangerous growing in the dark. Grand Admiral Theisk of the Velhari stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Burning Silence, and watched the blue-green marble of Verath 4 grow larger in the viewport. He was tall even for his kind, nearly 3 meters of scaled muscle and ancient bone wrapped in ceremonial armor that had been worn by 12 generations of admirals before him. His eyes were the color of heated copper, and they looked upon the human colony the way a boot looks upon an insect. "Signal all ships," he said, and his voice carried the deep resonance of a species that had ruled the stars for 9,000 years. "Bombardment formation. Standard pattern. We will begin the cleansing in 2 hours." His officers moved with practiced ease. Around him 12 capital ships of the Concord fleet spread into a perfect crescent, each one a cathedral of war and metal and fire. Any one of them could have reduced the colony to ash. The 12 together were simply a statement, a reminder to the galaxy of what happened to species that existed without permission. Theisk had carried out 4 such operations in his career. 2 had been against pirate stations. 1 had been against a rebellious Concord member state. The fourth had been against the Draenei, a young species that had made the mistake of developing faster than light travel without asking permission first. The Draenei no longer existed. Their homeworld was now an asteroid field that the Concorde used as a navigational waypoint. He did not think about the Draenei often. They had been unremarkable in life, and they were unremarkable in death. That was simply how the galaxy worked. The strong endured, and the weak were forgotten. A communications officer approached. "Grand Admiral, there is an incoming transmission from a human vessel. A cruiser at the edge of the system. It is requesting contact." Thaisk made a sound that was the Velhari equivalent of a bored sigh. "Put it through." The face that appeared on his screen was small and soft and utterly unimpressive. A human woman with short dark hair and calm eyes. She introduced herself as Captain Marin Visser of the UES Pale Morning, and she spoke in the careful, measured tones of someone who knew exactly how little power she held. "Grand Admiral," she said, "I am requesting time to evacuate civilians from the colony surface. We have families down there, children. I am asking for 6 hours to organize transport." Thaisk studied her, the way one might study a small animal performing an unexpected trick. There was something almost admirable about the audacity of it. This tiny creature, on her tiny ship, asking him for mercy, as if mercy were something she had earned. "You may have 2 hours," he said. "That should be more than sufficient for a species as short-lived as yours. You are accustomed to rushing." His officers laughed. Thaisk allowed himself a thin smile and cut the transmission. He turned to his second-in-command and said what every Velhari officer had said about humans for 400 years. They always beg. It is the one thing they are truly gifted at. Aboard the Pale Morning, Marin closed the channel and sat for a moment in perfect stillness. 2 hours. It was more than she needed. She opened the ship-wide intercom and spoke to all 300 souls aboard. "All hands, this is the captain. Report to the main cargo bay immediately. This is not a drill." They came quickly and they came quietly. Engineers and medics and gunners and cooks. They filled the cargo bay and stood in rows and looked up at their captain with the kind of trust that is only given to someone who has earned it over years of shared hardship. Marin looked at their faces and felt the weight of what she was about to tell them settle on her shoulders like iron. "What I am about to say does not leave this room," she began. "The Concorde of 12 has authorized the extermination of our species. Every human colony in the galaxy has been targeted for destruction. The fleet outside our window is here to kill everyone on Verath 4, every man and woman and child on that planet." The silence that followed was so complete, she could hear the hum of the air recyclers. "They believe this will be easy," she continued. "They believe we are what we have always appeared to be, a young and weak and unremarkable species, flying unremarkable ships through the corridors they allow us to use. They have believed this for 400 years, and we have let them, because the alternative was extinction before we were ready." She paused and placed her hand on the cargo bay wall. "We are ready now." She pressed a sequence into the wall panel, and the ship groaned. A deep vibration ran through the floor and up through the bones of every person standing in that bay. It was not the sound of engines or weapons powering up. It was the sound of something waking up. Something that had been sleeping for a very long time. "Ship is not what it appears to be," Marin said. "The Pale Morning is a Veil ship, one of 12 constructed in secret over the last 150 years. What you see on the outside is a shell, a disguise. Underneath it is something the galaxy has never encountered before." The outer hull began to shed. It started slowly. Panels of dull gray commercial plating detaching and drifting away like dead skin, revealing what lay beneath. The crew watched on the internal monitors as their familiar ship disappeared, piece by piece, and something else emerged in its place. The true hull was black. Not painted black, but black the way deep space is black. the way the absence of light is black. It absorbed every photon that touched it, and gave nothing back. Across its surface ran lines of energy that pulsed in slow rhythms, like the beating of an enormous heart. Weapon ports opened along the flanks, not the small defensive turrets of a merchant vessel, but long, angular structures that hummed, with a power source that made the air taste like copper. The pale morning was gone. In its place hung something that looked less like a ship and more like a wound in the fabric of space, a dark and terrible thing that had been hiding in plain sight for years, waiting for the moment it would be needed. Marin looked at her crew. Some of them were crying, some of them were shaking, a few were smiling with the fierce and desperate joy of people who had just learned they were not going to die helpless. "I will not lie to you," she said. "What comes next will be the hardest thing any of us have ever done. But I need you to understand something. They chose this, not us. They looked at our colonies and our children, and they decided we did not deserve to exist. They made that choice, and now they will learn what that choice costs." She turned to Tomas. "Send the signal to Earth. Priority Cipher 1. The phrase is, 'Morning has broken.'" Tomas sent it. His hands were steady. Walked back to the bridge, and sat in her captain's chair. The viewport showed the Concorde fleet hanging in formation around Verath 4. 12 beautiful and terrible ships, crewed by species that had ruled the galaxy since before humans had learned to make fire. She pressed the final activation sequence, and the pale morning's true systems came fully online. The bridge lights shifted from standard white to a deep amber, and every console lit up with readings that would have made no sense to any alien engineer in the known galaxy. "Uncloak," she said. On the command deck of the Burning Silence, a sensor officer suddenly stood up from his console so fast that his chair flew backward and struck the wall behind him. His scales had gone pale, a sign of absolute terror in a Velhari. "Grand Admiral," he said, and his voice cracked in a way that Theisk had never heard from one of his officers before. "The human ship, something is wrong. The energy signature, it is, Grand Admiral, it is reading higher than our entire fleet combined." Fisk turned to the viewport and saw it, a shape where the small human cruiser had been. A dark and impossible shape that pulsed with power like a black star being born. For the first time in his very long life, Grand Admiral Fisk felt something he did not have a word for in his language. Humans had a word for it. They called it fear. It came from the forward lance of the pale morning, a weapon that had no name in any galactic database because no galactic database knew it existed. The beam was white and narrow, and it crossed the distance between the pale morning and the Concorde flagship in the time it takes a heart to beat once. The Burning Silence had shields rated to withstand a sustained bombardment from 3 capital ships firing simultaneously. Those shields lasted exactly 1/4 of a second. The beam passed through them the way sunlight passes through glass, and it struck the flagship along its center axis. The ship did not explode. It split, cleanly and quietly, into 2 halves that drifted apart like the pages of an opened book. Internal fires bloomed in the vacuum, and then went dark as the oxygen burned away. 1,200 Velhari crew members died in under 2 seconds. The remaining 11 Concorde ships did not react for a full 3 seconds because the officers aboard them processed what they had just witnessed. Their flagship, the most powerful warship in the fleet, had been killed by a single shot from a vessel that 10 minutes ago had been a merchant cruiser. It was like watching a mouse swallow a lion whole. The brain simply refused to accept it. Then the panic began. 6 ships broke formation, immediately scattering in different directions like startled birds. The other 5 attempted to regroup and bring their weapons to bear on the pale morning. This was the sensible military response. It was what their training demanded. It was also completely useless. The pale morning moved. It did not accelerate in the way that normal ships accelerate. a steady push of engines against the weight of mass. It simply changed position. One moment it was at the edge of the formation, the next it was inside it, threading between capital ships like a needle through cloth. The alien officers tracking it on their sensors watched their screens with wide eyes. Because the movement patterns they were seeing violated every known law of inertial physics. Humanity had not just built better weapons, they had built a better understanding of how the universe worked. They had taken the physics that the elder species considered settled and complete, and they had found the gaps, the places where the rules bent, and the places where the rules broke entirely. They had found these things in silence over 150 years, and they had told no one. The Concorde ships opened fire. Everything they had, plasma batteries and kinetic lances, and gravity torpedoes, and particle beams, all of it converging on the dark shape that danced between them. The space around the pale morning turned white with energy. Enough firepower to crack a small moon struck its hull from every angle. The warplate held. It did not hold the way a shield holds, by pushing energy away. It held the way a living thing holds, by absorbing and redistributing, adapting. The black surface of the hull rippled like water, as each impact was caught and channeled and dispersed across the entire structure. The ship shuddered and groaned, and for a moment, Marin gripped the arms of her chair, hard enough to turn her knuckles white. But the ship did not break. "Return fire," she said. "Targeted strikes only. Engines and weapon systems. I want them crippled, not destroyed." Her weapons officers obeyed. The pale morning struck with surgical precision. Each shot found its mark with an accuracy that should not have been possible in the chaos of a fleet engagement. One by one the Concorde ships went dark. Engines dead, weapons offline, hulls intact but powerless. They tumbled through space like stones thrown into a pond. Marin could have destroyed them all. She had the power to do it, and every person on her bridge knew it. The convergence lance could have cut through the remaining fleet in under a minute and left nothing but expanding clouds of gas and metal. She chose not to. She chose to leave them alive, because dead ships tell no stories, and Marin Visser needed the galaxy to hear what had happened here today. The battle lasted 11 minutes. When it was over, 8 Concorde capital ships drifted without power in the space around Varith 4. 3 had managed to flee into hyperspace, trailing smoke and fire. The burning silence was in 2 pieces, and its crew was dead. Grand Admiral Theisk was not among them. He had transferred to a secondary command vessel before the battle. Standard Valhari protocol for fleet actions. He was alive, and he was watching from the bridge of a crippled ship, as the dark shape of the pale morning glided through the wreckage of his fleet like a shark through still water. Marin opened a channel to his ship. Her face appeared on his screen, the same small soft face he had looked at 2 hours ago, with amusement and contempt. She did not look different. Her expression had not changed. She was still calm, and still measured, and still utterly unimpressive to look at. But Theisk understood now that he had been looking at the wrong things. He had been looking at the surface, and the surface had been a lie. "Grand Admiral," Marin said, "your fleet is disabled. Your flagship is destroyed. Varath 4 and its 40,000 civilians are unharmed. You may collect your wounded and withdraw from this system. You will not be fired upon during your retreat." Theisk stared at her. His copper eyes burned with something that might have been rage, or might have been shame, or might have been the terrible dawning realization that everything he had believed about the universe was wrong. "How?" he said, and the word came out cracked and dry. "How did you hide this?" "We did not hide it," Marin said. "You simply never looked. We have been building for 150 years, Grand Admiral. We have been building since the day we learned what happened to the Draenei and the 2 species before them. We knew what you were. We knew what you would do. and we decided a very long time ago that we would not go quietly." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that had nothing to do with volume. "You had every chance to leave us alone." She closed the channel. On the bridge of the pale morning, her crew sat in stunned and exhausted silence. The smell of overheated circuitry hung in the recycled air, and the deck plates were still warm from the energy the warplate had absorbed. Several officers were crying, not from fear, but from the sheer overwhelming release of tension that comes after surviving something that should have killed you. Marin allowed herself 30 seconds to close her eyes and breathe. Then she opened them and turned to Tomas. "What is the status of the other Veil ships?" Tomas checked his encrypted channels and looked up with an expression that was halfway between awe and terror. "Have received the signal. Captain, all 11 are reporting ready." Across the galaxy at that very moment, 11 ships that the Concorde had never thought to fear began to change. Cargo vessels and transport ships and science frigates, quiet and unremarkable vessels, crewed by a quiet and unremarkable species, shed their outer skins like butterflies emerging from cocoons. And what emerged was not soft, and was not fragile, and was not anything that would ever be dismissed again. Marin looked out at the stars beyond the wreckage of the Concorde fleet, and thought about the century and a half of secret labor that had brought humanity to this moment. The thousands of engineers and physicists and soldiers who had worked in silence, knowing they might never live to see the day their work was needed. The sacrifice and the patience and the cold burning determination of the species that had been told again and again that it did not matter. They mattered now. Find out just how much. In the 72 hours that followed the Battle of Vareth IV, the galaxy learned a lesson that would reshape its history forever. The lesson was simple, and it was brutal, and it went like this. You do not truly know a species until you have given it a reason to show you what it really is. The 12 Veil ships uncloaked simultaneously. They appeared at locations spread across the full breadth of civilized space, and each one had been placed with a precision that spoke of decades of planning. This was not a desperate counterattack thrown together in panic. This was a strategy that had been refined and rehearsed and perfected over generations. The UES Black Horizon uncloaked at the Concorde's primary shipyard above the Velhari homeworld. It was a siegebreaker class, massive and armored and carrying weapons designed to reduce orbital infrastructure to dust. It did not fire. Instead, it simply appeared and broadcast a single message to every station and satellite in range. Your shipyard is now under human protection. Any vessel that attempts to launch will be disabled. Remain calm. The UES Silent Meridian uncloaked at the Concorde's central communications nexus, a vast array of relay stations that carried 90% of all interstellar communications. Within minutes, it had taken control of the network, not by destroying it, but by inserting itself into the system so deeply that removing it would have meant cutting off half the galaxy from the other half. The elder species suddenly realized that the communication infrastructure they had relied on for millennia had human fingerprints buried in its code. Human engineers had been maintaining these systems for centuries, working quietly in the background, doing the jobs that no elder species considered worthy of attention. Nobody had ever questioned why humans were so eager to do the boring work. Now they understood. The UES Whispered Edge appeared at the Porathi hegemony's fleet staging grounds. The Korathi were the most aggressive of the Concorde species, a warrior culture that measured status by the number of worlds they had conquered. They responded to the uncloaking exactly as their nature demanded. They attacked. 30 Korathi warships fired on the Whispered Edge with everything they had. The Veil ship weathered the assault, and then disabled every single one of them in 4 minutes flat. It moved through the Korathi fleet like a blade through tall grass, and when it was done, 30 warships drifted without power, in perfect formation, as if they had simply decided to stop working all at once. The Karathi High Command watched this happen on their tactical screens, and then they did something unprecedented in the history of their species. They went quiet. But the Karathi were not finished yet. Deep in their territory, hidden behind 3 layers of defense stations, they had been building something, a planet cracker, a weapon designed to shatter a world's crust and turn its surface into a sea of magma. They had been building it in secret for years, and its target was Earth. They launched it. The UES Long Memory was waiting. The Long Memory was the oldest of the 12 Veil ships, the first one built and the one that carried the most advanced version of the Convergence Lance. Its captain was a man named David Okafor, who had spent 30 years pretending to be the commander of a survey vessel while actually commanding the most powerful single warship in human history. He was a quiet man who kept a photograph of his daughter on his console, and who had once told his crew that the purpose of strength was to make sure you never had to use it. He used it now. The Long Memory intercepted the planet cracker in deep space. The weapon was enormous, a cylinder of metal and energy half a kilometer long, screaming toward Earth at relativistic speeds. Okafor did not simply destroy it. He turned it. The Convergence Lance struck them, planet cracker at a precise angle, and the weapon's own energy was redirected, bent back along a new trajectory that sent it hurtling toward the Karathi staging moon, where it had been built. The moon was a military installation, housing weapons factories and fleet command centers. The planet cracker struck it at full velocity. The moon ceased to exist. Where it had been, there was now an expanding sphere of superheated debris that would glow in the Karathi sky for years. The message was as clear as anything ever spoken in any language. Whatever you try to do to us, we will do to you, and we will do it faster, and we will do it with your own weapons. The Concord of 12 began to fracture. The Thessarai, a diplomatic species that had always been uncomfortable with the Ash Decree, broke ranks first. They transmitted a formal withdrawal from the Concord and a request for direct negotiations with Earth. The Arani followed within hours. Then the Bavathi, whose names most humans had never learned, because most humans had never been considered important enough to learn the names of the species that ruled them. Within 48 hours of the uncloaking, half the Concord had abandoned the coalition. The remaining species, the Velhari and the Karathi, and a handful of others too proud or too afraid to surrender, attempted to rally. They pooled their remaining fleets and prepared for a final stand at the Galactic core, where their combined firepower might be enough to challenge the Veil ships. It was at this point that the galaxy received a broadcast from Earth. The transmission came on every frequency in every language simultaneously. It was not delivered by a president or a general or an admiral. It was delivered by a woman named Dr. Amara Osei, who held the title of Speaker for Humanity, a position that had existed in secret for over a century, waiting for this exact moment. Her message was brief. To all species of the Concord, and to all peoples of the galaxy, we did not want this. You chose it when you decided that our species did not deserve to live. You built a plan to murder our children and burn our worlds and erase us from history, as you have erased others before us. We knew, we prepared, and now you see what we built in the silence you gave us. She paused, and the galaxy held its breath. But we are not you. We do not wish to rule through fear. We do not wish to build an empire on the bones of the conquered. We wish to live, freely and equally, and without the threat of extinction hanging over our heads. So we say this to you now. Choose again. Choose peace and we will meet you with open hands. Choose war and we will finish what you started. We will not enjoy it, but we will not hesitate. The broadcast ended. Grand Admiral Fisk sat in a borrowed office on a borrowed station and listened to the human woman's words. He had escaped Varith 4 in a crippled ship and had spent 3 days limping to the nearest Velhari outpost. He had not slept in that time. He had spent every waking hour reading intelligence reports, and each one was worse than the last. The 12 Veil ships were devastating, but they were not what broke him. What broke him was the report from Deep Space Intelligence, long-range observatories that watched the dark spaces between stars for signs of movement. The analysts had detected energy signatures in the human system's Oort cloud, the vast shell of ice and rock that surrounded their home star. The signatures indicated construction, massive construction. Hundreds of new ships were being built out there in the cold dark at the edge of human space. Ships that dwarfed even the Veil ships. Ships that were still being assembled and tested and armed. The 12 Veil ships were not humanity's army. They were humanity's warning shot. Fisk set down the report and placed his hands flat on the desk. His scales had gone pale. Not darken again. He thought about the word his people used for humans, Kethra, those who will pass. He had never in his life been more wrong about anything. The galaxy had kicked a rock and discovered that it was not a rock at all. It was an egg. And what was hatching from it was something that the elder species, in all their thousands of years of wisdom, had never once imagined was possible. A predator that had chosen to disguise itself as prey, not out of weakness, but out of patience. And now the disguise was gone. 3 months after the uncloaking, the galaxy existed in a state of stunned and fragile silence. The Concord of 12 was gone, not destroyed, but dissolved like salt in water. Some species had surrendered. Others had simply stopped responding to communications. The great coalition that had ruled the stars for millennia had crumbled in less than a week, and the power vacuum it left behind was so vast that every species in the galaxy could feel it pulling at them like gravity. Humanity had won. That fact sat at the center of galactic politics like a stone dropped into a still pond, and the ripples had not yet reached the edges. 12 ships had broken the spine of the most powerful military alliance in history, and the fleet in the Oort cloud had not even launched. A species that the galaxy had dismissed as temporary had proven itself to be the most dangerous civilization anyone had ever encountered. The question that now consumed every government and every council, chamber and every frightened admiral in known space was simple. What would the humans do with their power? History provided an answer, and it was not a comforting one. Every species that had ever achieved dominance had used it to subjugate. The Velhari had done it. The Karathi had done it. The Concord itself had been built on the graves of younger species who had been deemed too threatening to exist. Power corrupted, and absolute power destroyed. This was not a human saying, but it might as well have been, because it described the pattern of galactic history with perfect accuracy. So when the humans announced that they were convening a peace summit, and that Captain Marin Visser would represent them, the galaxy expected one of two things: demands or destruction. The summit was held on Tessera Station, a neutral trading post that orbited a dead star in unclaimed space. Representatives from every major species attended. Some came willingly, and some came because they had no choice. And some came simply because they were afraid of what would happen if they stayed away. Marin arrived aboard the pale morning. The ship still bore the scorch marks from Verath IV. She had refused to have them repaired. Some of her crew thought this was a statement of strength. Look at what we survived. Others thought it was a statement of grief. Look at what you made us do. Both interpretations were correct. Marin walked into the summit chamber in a simple dark uniform, with no medals and no weapons. She was shorter than almost every alien delegate in the room. She looked exactly as unremarkable as she had always looked, and every being present knew now what a terrible mistake it was to judge humans by their appearance. She stood at the central podium and looked out at the assembled representatives of 100 species. She saw fear in most of their eyes, hatred in some, hope in a few. She spoke. 3 months ago, your Concord voted to exterminate my species. You planned to burn our colonies and murder our children. and erase us from the stars, the way you erased the Draenei and the two species before them. You did this because you believed we were weak, and because you believed the weak exist only at the pleasure of the strong. The chamber was so quiet that the hum of the station's life support systems sounded like thunder. You were wrong about us. But that is not why I am here. I am not here to punish you. I am not here to make demands. I am not here to build an empire on the fear we have earned. I am here because the galaxy cannot survive another Concord. Not yours and not ours. She activated a display behind her, and the delegates saw the framework of what humanity was proposing. A new agreement. A new structure. Not a coalition of the powerful, ruling the weak, but a compact of equals, bound by mutual obligation and mutual protection. She called it the Threshold Compact. Its terms were radical. No species would ever again be confined to containment lanes. No species would be marked for extinction, regardless of how young or how strange or how threatening it appeared to be. Any civilization that achieved spaceflight would be welcomed into the galactic community with full rights and full protections. Technology would be shared, not hoarded. Defense would be collective, not competitive. And then Marin said the thing that made every delegate in the room stop breathing. As a gesture of commitment, humanity will decommission the Uncloaked fleet. The ships that are currently under construction will be dismantled. Their materials will be converted to civilian use. Murmurs erupted across the chamber. The Uncloaked fleet was the single most terrifying military asset in the galaxy. The fact that humanity was willing to give it up was either an act of extraordinary courage or extraordinary madness. We will retain the 12 Veil ships, Marin continued. They are our insurance. They are the guarantee that no one will ever again look at our colonies and see easy targets. But the fleet that could have made us tyrants, that we will destroy ourselves. Because we did not build it to rule, we built it to survive. And now that we have survived, we do not need it anymore. A Velhari delegate rose from his seat. His name was not important, but his question was, how do we know this is not a trick? How do we know you will not simply rebuild once we have disarmed? Marin looked at him with an expression that held no anger and no contempt. Only a wariness that went deeper than bone. You do not know, she said. You will have to trust us. I understand that trust is difficult for you. Your entire civilization was built on the principle that trust is weakness. But I will tell you something that the Velhari have never understood. Trust is not the absence of power. Trust is the choice to restrain power. And restraint is the hardest thing any species can learn. Again, after the formal session ended, Grand Admiral Theisk requested a private meeting with Marin. He had attended the summit as an observer, stripped of his rank and his fleet and his pride. He was an old man now, or at least he looked like one. The copper had faded from his eyes, and his scales hung loose on his frame, as if his body had decided it no longer needed to hold itself together. They met in a small room overlooking the dead star. Theisk stood by the window, and Marin stood by the door, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. "Why did you spare me?" Theisk asked finally. "At Varath 4, you could have destroyed my ship. You had every reason to kill me. I ordered the bombardment. I would have killed your people without hesitation. Why am I alive?" Marin looked at him. This creature who had once looked at her with contempt and called her species a thing that would pass. She felt many things in that moment. Anger, yes, that would never fully leave her. People had lived with for centuries. Pity for a being who had built his entire identity on a lie of superiority that the universe had finally and permanently corrected. "Because extinction is easy," she said. "Living with what you have done is harder." Theisk said nothing. His hands trembled at his sides. "You will spend the rest of your life knowing that you tried to murder an entire species and failed," Marin continued. You will know that the species you despised was stronger than you ever imagined, and that it chose to let you live, not because you deserved mercy, but because mercy is what separates us from what you were. That is a heavier punishment than death, Grand Admiral, and I think somewhere inside yourself, you know it. She left him standing by the window, looking out at the dead star. The Threshold Compact was signed the following day, not because the galaxy trusted humanity. Trust would take generations to build, if it could be built at all. Because every species in that chamber understood a fundamental truth that the uncloaking had made impossible to ignore. Humanity could destroy them, and had chosen not to. That choice was more powerful than any weapon, and more terrifying than any fleet, because it meant that humans operated by a code that the elder species had never considered possible. A code that said power without mercy was not strength, but sickness. Marin returned to the pale morning after the signing ceremony. Her crew greeted her in the corridor, and she shook every hand and thanked every officer by name. She was tired in a way that sleep would not fix, but she walked with her back straight and her eyes clear, because that was what her people needed to see. On the bridge, Tomas was waiting. He had a cup of coffee ready. Real coffee, not the synthetic substitute that most ships carried. He handed it to her, and she took it with both hands and held it close to her chest. "Do you think it will hold?" he asked. "The peace." Marin sipped her coffee and looked out the viewport at the stars. The same stars she had watched from this same window 3 months ago, when the world was different and the future was dark. She thought about the message she had received that day, the Ash Decree, the moment she had learned that her species had been sentenced to death by a galaxy that had never bothered to learn their names. She thought about the generations of humans who had worked in secret, building the Veil ships in darkness, pouring their genius and their fear and their stubborn refusal to die into 12 ships that could change the course of history. She thought about the children on Verath 4 who were alive tonight because of that work. Children who would grow up and have children of their own and never fully understand how close they had come to not existing at all. She thought about mercy and how much it cost, and how it was the only currency that mattered in the end. "Matter," she said quietly. "If it breaks, we will be ready. We are always ready." That is the part they never understood. She set down her coffee and placed her hand on the console. The pale morning hummed beneath her fingers, alive and patient and waiting. Beneath the scorched civilian hull, the warplate pulsed once, like a heartbeat, like a promise, like a warning. The stars burned on, and the pale morning carried its crew forward, into whatever came next, ready for peace and ready for war, and ready for the long, patient work of teaching a galaxy that the smallest voice in the room had been the most important one all along. And somewhere deep in the walls of the ship, in the place where the true hull met the disguise, something hummed at a frequency that no alien species had ever heard. The sound of a species that had learned the hardest lesson the universe had to teach. That survival was not about being the strongest. It was about being the one who never, ever stopped getting back up.